Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Cat People, 1942. Val Lewton was far from the stereotypical image we have of a Hollywood producer. He was neither brash nor rude in manner, nor loudly overconfident in his opinions. Instead, he was meticulous, tasteful, and exuded a quiet power much like his films, concealing his intense ambition behind modesty just as the roaming Irena in Cat People conceals her desires in the shadows. Lewton was also no simple packager of other people's talent. He was a supremely hands-on producer who oversaw every detail of his department's scripts and often rewrote them, which is why the 9 remarkable horror films he produced between 1942 and 1946 bear the stamp of his personality as much as their own directors. This is not to downplay the achievements of the superb team Lewton assembled around him. There was cinematographer Nicholas Musuraka, composer Roy Webb, and 2 editors who gained their first film directing assignments thanks to him. Robert Wise, the Oscar-nominated editor of Citizen Kane, as well as the Magnificent Ambersons, was given 1944's Curse of the Cat People to direct by Lewton. Secondly, Wise's assistant editor on the Wells films, Mark Robson, began working for Lewton as production assistant and editor, before earning his own directorial debut on The Seventh Victim in 1943, leading to 4 others, including Lewton's non-horror teen feature Youth Runs Wild. Robson was Academy Award nominated himself for Peyton Place in 1958. For Cat People, Lewton needed a stylish director whose taste was simpatico with his own to take charge of the all-important opening movie of his tenure. Recalling his time on A Tale of Two Cities, he knew the perfect collaborator. Cat People is a hugely impressive achievement on many levels. It was Val Lewton's first release as a producer for RKO, and made under studio restrictions that many creatives would have found demoralizing. Each film of his tenure had to be brought in for no more than a tightly budgeted $150,000. Their running times, as B-picture supporting features, could not exceed 75 minutes, and most chafing for Lewton, he was forced to accept the lurid, audience-tested titles his bosses forced upon him. Lewton learned to maneuver within these limitations, at the same time capitalizing on the gift he had in largely being left alone to interpret them through his artistic vision. Arguably, the assumed freedom of a much greater budgeted A-picture would also have an accompanying greater scrutiny by the studio heads. For his cabal of talent, Lewton chose wisely. His director, Jacques Tourneur, shared not only his meticulous eye and craft, but also Lewton's unceasing desire to transcend the mundane mainstream. Speaking of his loathing for television many years later, Tourneur revealed what drove him aesthetically as a filmmaker. If you don't bring some of your individuality and some of your experience and sensitivity to bear on a subject, you don't get more than a mechanical result. Indeed, his interpretive genius as a director has such flair that when viewing Cat People, one continually has to remember that it is a B-movie. The care and sensitivity shown by all departments lifts it far above what other studios were producing in quality. Instead of the routine schlocky horror that the title suggested, audiences were getting something that both pandered to and subverted their expectations. Lewton was careful to supply the horror jump shocks that the genre required, and it does feature felines who are supernaturally bound to human beings in macabre ways. And yet, the producer-director partnership layered in subtexts of meaning, clues, and character storytelling so deeply that if all the horror elements were cut out, Cat People could still stand as an engrossing drama of a failing marriage doomed by dark secrets. Like everything else in the film, this was a deliberate result of rare and painstaking artistry. In DeWitt Bodine's carefully structured screenplay, the story's protagonist, Irena Dubrovna and Oliver Reed, Simone Simon and Kent Smith, meet cute at the zoo, where we discover much of their essential natures immediately. She is a sketching artist of talent, whose playful surface hides a passionate temperament for high standards, as she carefully tosses each draft drawing away of the panther who fascinates her. Oliver is transfixed by her beauty, and her littering brings out his innate decency and almost paternal care. The casting of the two leads is a masterstroke. Feline French actress Simon was already a star in her homeland, and since arriving in Hollywood had already given a literally bewitching cameo in The Devil and Daniel Webster, which I've also covered. In casting his Irena, Lewton actually sought a little kitten face like Simone Simon. She is as charming and endlessly watchable as a cat, being both cute and with hidden dark depths that subtly turn from playful to the self-servingly demonic. Beware those who underestimate the physical winsomeness of her petite size. Her scarlet fingernails are claws, and there is something within her poised to pounce. What lies beneath Irena's kittenish charm is as yet unknown to the man she will entrance. Kent Smith's seemingly bland marine engineer Oliver is a disarming and necessary counterpoint to Irena's exoticism, describing himself aptly as a good plain Americano, a tall, handsome, solid man of integrity and conscience, embodied by an actor who exuded those qualities in a long career of nearly 5 decades, if never quite achieving stardom. Irena lives alone in an apartment, at the top of the staircase recycled from Wells's The Magnificent Ambersons, and gradually draws Oliver into her lair. Her Serbian background is drenched in tragedy and dark menace. Both her parents had died by the time she was a teenager. Her village history is steeped in suspicion of practiced devil worship, resulting in Irena's seemingly irrational fear that she must never make love to or even kiss a man, for fear that she will transform into a cat or panther and kill them. She possesses a statue, or maybe it possesses her, of her country's saviour, King John, spearing a cat-like symbol of the fabled 13th century Muslim Mameluke warrior enemies of their land. This is a contradictory image for such a fetishist of the feline, and adds to her complexity, possibly suggesting an inner duality and conflict. She is also curiously fond of the unlikeliest elements. "I like the dark. It's friendly," she purrs. This enigmatic and elusive woman with her macabre fantasies beguiles Oliver so much that he endures, even welcomes the enticing mystery of Irena, knowing she is destined to always be ultimately unknowable to him. He buys her a kitten as part of his gentlemanly courtship. The Moggie's hackles rise in her presence, causing them to exchange it for a canary at the pet shop, whose entire menagerie are similarly freaked out by her. "Cats just don't like me," Irena explains, further confusing us and Oliver. Irena's secret smile of delight at her preferred present is almost predatory, though when she teases the bird, its sudden demise on the cage floor fills her with genuine regret. To complicate the central relationship, there is Oliver's co-worker friend Alice, Jane Randolph. She seems to be his gal pal's shoulder to cry on, but is an expertly crafted inciting wedge between the couple as the story unfolds. The original gifted cat takes to Alice just fine, and she appears to be the epitome of guileless understanding when her colleague increasingly confides the frustration he is too nice to admit to Irena. Another striking female haunts Irena during the couple's wedding night meal, a brief, albeit crucial cameo by the equally feline Elizabeth Russell, who would feature much more substantially in the 1944 sequel Curse of the Cat People. "She looks like a cat," says workmate Doc Carver indifferently, in one of the genre roles Alan Napier spun his wheels with, till his elegant 6'5" frame was shot to fame in the 60s TV Batman as Butler Alfred. The lady comes over and punctures the festivities with an innocently blunt inquiry to Irena. "Moja sestra?" My sister? Russell's voice was dubbed by Simon to subtly accentuate her link with her fellow Serbian. Irena's reaction, though, is a hasty crossing of herself in fear at this bad-luck supernatural reminder of home crossing her path. Some critics saw a seam of lesbianism implied by this encounter. Writer DeWitt Bodine dismissed this as his intention. Whilst cat people's varied symbolism is rich enough to support even the most fanciful argument, it is infused with more than the ideas of Bodine and Tourneur alone. Val Lewton's personality and preoccupations imprint themselves on the film's heroine. In real life, he shared Irena's lifelong fascination with death and her fear of being physically touched that must have placed him at a similar slight remove from those around him. Most bizarre of all, considering the material, was his intense fear of cats. One might argue a parallel between his and Irena's complex embracing of the very thing that also horrifies them. A less welcome influence on the screenplay was Joseph Breen's all-powerful censorship office, who were troubled by Irena's original account of being illegitimate, thus tweaked. Any suggestion of sexual consummation, a key plot element in the end, and the horror angle, which Lewton and his team treated with their emerging signature style of restraint. The gloves are delicately taken off, however, where Alice is concerned. She takes devious advantage of Oliver's confided struggle about Irena's physical distance to confess her own hitherto concealed love for him. This self-serving will become a catalyst for Irena's darker territorial side to flex its claws with fatal consequences in the film's later, most memorable scenes. As if hubby's sly colleague on the make and a second cat person isn't enough, the course of Irena's embattled true love is further hampered by unprofessional advances from the psychiatrist Alice recommended for her. Dr. Judd, the Falcon movie series' lead Tom Conway, listens to her recount her past in a stunningly isolated circle of light placed by cinematographer Nicholas Musuraca. She reveals that her mother was labeled a witch by villagers who branded her a shape-changing cat person. Judd then crosses ethical boundaries with honey-toned smoothness, challenging her fear of inherited panther prowess with the offer of kissing her. Conway's languid, top-drawer Britishness was an intriguingly assumed shape in itself. He and his more famous younger brother, actor George Sanders, were actually both from an aristocratic Russian family forced to flee after the country's revolution. Sanders in particular harbored a lifelong resentment of being cheated over his rightful inheritance, and although he achieved great fame, with an Oscar for All About Eve in 1950, and 1957's The Jungle Book equally showcasing his sinister verbal velvetiness, he took his own life in 1972. Like him, Conway was plagued by alcoholism, and his death preceded his brother by 5 years, after being found in a seedy flophouse. As a result of Alice's seemingly benign interference, doom is set to stalk her. When Irena learns that the shrink was Alice's idea, she icily warns her husband, "There are some things a woman doesn't want other women to understand." Like an alley cat backed up against a wall, the invasion of her privacy will turn her from a pussy into a hellcat. "A cat just walked over my grave," remarks Alice as she says goodnight to Oliver. This deliciously prefigures her solo walk home through Central Park, in a brilliant sequence of threatened danger and suggestive power. Roy Webb's music score is suddenly silent. We are left with the creepy echo of Alice's heels clicking along the pavement, intercut with those of the pursuing Irena. The air is thick with unseen menace. Alice continually looks behind her to the left of frame, until, tss, not a feline attack, but the air brakes of a bus bursting in from the right-hand side. Cinema audiences received a classic jump shock, skillfully administered by Tourneur's sleight-of-screen distraction, superb sound design by John L. Cass, and the editing of Mark Robson. This effect became known as the Lewton bus, reused in his work and homaged by countless others. Equally, the claustrophobic tracking of prey through the dark urban jungle would inspire such directors as Alan J. Pakula in the sequence where paranoia haunts Robert Redford in All the President's Men. Irena may have stalked Alice invisibly, but she leaves unmistakable slaughter in her wake, satiating her frustration on lambs at the zoo. A similarly indelible mark is left on her by an effective dream sequence designed by Linwood Dunn, full of haunting symbolism, predatory animated panthers, Judd as a hunter putting them to the sword in the armor of King John, and the key to the panther cave she gave to its zookeeper earlier, which may unlock her own tragic destiny. The most notorious scene of cat people is yet to come, whereby the huntress makes the boldest pursuit of her prey in a hotel swimming pool. Alice goes for a swim, and at her most physically vulnerable, is tormented by a cat-like shadow we see spreading across the wall. Once again, without music, we are similarly naked and sense-sharpened, listening in suspense to the water droplets reverberate and the deep rising growl of a very hungry cat. She dives into the water in vain. There is no escape from the animal force closing in on her prissy doggy paddling. At the peak of tension, a light switch flicks on, and against the wall leans Irena, a triumphantly grinning Cheshire cat savouring the pawing of her little mouse. Some later horror maestros like Clive Barker had no patience with this technique of teasing the viewer with a solely imagined horror, preferring the in-your-face visceral terror of a monster in full sight. It is hard, though, to conceive of anything physical that could live up to what our minds imagine for Irena's evil metamorphosis here. A woman in a catsuit can be alluringly sexy, but a costume to create fear is more likely to end up inspiring laughs, like the disastrous monkey-suited men of the era's tacky gorilla shockers. Lewton and his team were too refined for such self-sabotage. In 1957, Tourneur aimed to further develop this mind's-eye-only representation of ultimate fear in his monster concept for Night of the Demon in 1957, only to be overruled by his then-employers at Columbia Studios. Inevitably, Irena must draw human blood. She cannot be satisfied by weak, innocent animal victims. She doesn't know her gallant husband has been torturing himself to do right by her. It's too late, he mournfully tells her. Alice has moved into his lonely heart. Irena slumps into the sofa, her inner homicidal resolve signalled by the marvellous touch of her nails, scratching long slashes down the cushion. "I love loneliness," she intones, as if trying to soothe her fatally divided soul. At least Irena has one deserving victim she can fatally lash out at in the lascivious form of Dr. Judd. In a cheeky reference to Universal's The Wolfman, he blithely mentions possibly defending himself with silver bullets loaded in a gun. An even more direct tribute from it is his sword cane, which sadly for him is no help after he willfully kisses Irena. She allows him to do so, the sparkle in her eyes momentarily caught by Musuraca's artful lens, as she transforms again. We still do not see the change, yet receive it reflected in Judd's terrified reaction before death. As with her life, Irena's cat, who walks by itself, must also decide alone when to end it, and she does so with the awful inexorability of returning to the panther at the zoo where the story began. She releases it from its cage to launch at her, freeing it from captivity and herself from the prison of the human condition. When Oliver and Alice find her body, the ambivalence of Irena's damaged journey rears up even in death, to amplify his guilty feelings. She never lied to us. Simone Simon never again found a lead role that fit her as well as Irena. In Greg Mank's informative DVD commentary, she recalled, "I was Irena when I shot. It was like a weird connection. Everything came naturally. I worked on that picture with all of my being." Despite the confidence of his vision, Lewton was extremely apprehensive about the reaction in advance of Cat People's screening in December 1942. Everything was riding on this first venture of his as producer. The staging of the RKO premiere was no help, consisting of a Disney cartoon beforehand that centered around a cat. By the time the main feature started, audience members were still meowing facetiously. Lewton's heart sank. He needn't have worried, though. The astonishing latent power of his film slowly weaved its magic upon the restless crowd, converting and subverting them through poetic tenderness and orchestrated blasts of palpable fear into a rousing reception. Lewton and his team were now an overnight smash success. Tune in to my next episode as I discuss the duo's next film, I Walked with a Zombie. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.